So lots of talk here about Big 12 basketball. Things going pretty well. Same for, I'll give it to the SEC. They've got a record 7 teams in the Sweet 16. Big 10 is having a great NCAA tournament. The Big East, maybe not so much. Maybe not so much. But are the tables about to be turned on that? Is everything about to be flipped on its head as far as that goes? Because it might. It might. That's what this Ross Dellinger article says, the latest from the best newsbreaker in college sports right now, Ross Dellinger at Yahoo Sports. He's got a whole article, lots of stuff that we need to digest here about how Power 4 basketball schools could be in trouble. And obviously that includes the Big 12, who has a couple of schools in Kansas and Houston that right now are very much driven by basketball over football. This could be a problem. Revenue sharing era presents some new dynamics here. And the dynamics at play have to do with the Big East. It's funny. I was listening to a radio show earlier this week, and I heard the host ask the question like, "Hey, it's not been the greatest tournament or year for the Big East. Like, are they kind of tapped out now in this era as we move forward? Like, will they not be as much of a factor anymore?" And I hadn't even totally considered all of this with how it'll break down when you get to the revenue sharing era. So here's the crux of the issue, right? Revenue sharing era, you get $20.5 million to distribute. In order to be competitive in football, you've got to give like 75% of that. That's been kind of what seems to be like industry standard. You've got to give like 75% of that to your football program if you're going to be competitive. Football is what drives the bus on realignment. Basketball probably matters more than it used to, but football is the driver. So if you're a big football school at one of these Power 4 conferences, you've gotta funnel a bunch of the money into that. You really have no choice. But then what do you do about basketball? Most of these schools are winding up with like $2 to $4 million left for basketball. But if you're in the Big East and you don't have that football program to worry about that's going to eat up 12, 13, 14 million dollars of your revenue sharing number, well, now you can, hey, what's stopping you from giving 6 or 7 to basketball? And that is the concern. You can still give extra NIL outside of that, but it's got to be supposedly, another key part of the issue here, supposedly a fair market value deal. And if that is actually true, and if they're going to stick to that, they being the NCAA, that becomes an issue. The Big East is going to be, they're going to have Deloitte hats. They're going to have Deloitte fat heads up on the wall, rooting for that to come through and be a legitimate enforcement agency with teeth that keeps those to fair market value NIL deals. Let me start reading you some from this article. Here's a quote from Duke Athletic Director Nina King to Ross Dellinger. Says, in the Big East, their basketball revenue share portion will be a lot more than what those of us who have Division I football programs can do. Dellinger says mid-major programs operating without having to invest in a power conference football team are expected to, in some cases, outspend their football-focused big brothers. Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC, he has admitted that this is an issue. Quote, people have raised the issue with me, and they're raising it more frequently right now. Makes sense. You're in the heat of the NCAA tournament, right? College basketball is hot. Quote, it's something we are having conversations about at every meeting. I'm confident in our school's ability to compete, but it does raise a set of questions. Now, the question with Sankey to me will be, how can this guy find a way to flex his influence on the entire college athletics world right now to make this not be a thing? Because I would imagine he will find a way to make this not be a thing. There's going to be more on that later. But as far as the breakdown here, so Dellinger points out, Power League football programs will spend as much as 13 to 16 million on football. That's to remain competitive in the cash cow of the industry. And then that would leave them with only $2 to $4 million to be directly shared with men's basketball. And look, it may have been in this article, but I just kind of a working knowledge too. Top 25 basketball roster this year probably cost you $5 million ish, and then those at the top probably spending more like $8-9 million at the very tip top of the amount of money spent. Now, not all of those were very wise or went well. My K-State Wildcats made a lot of headlines. They're spending a lot of money to not make the tournament. So it did not go well in every case. But that's an idea of what you're needing right now to fund that caliber of a roster. And you're talking about having 2 to 4 million instead of 6 to 10, whatever it might take there. Dellinger says as many as a dozen non-power league Division I schools, many of them in the Big East, are planning to spend at least $5 million on their men's basketball roster next year, with a smaller group hoping to reach the $6 to $7 million marks. So some in the Big East want to spend $7 million on this roster, and you may be stuck at like $3.5, $4 million if you're having a rev share with football. And you've got a rev share with football because it's not just like, hey, this is the one that makes more money and stuff right now. But for so many of these schools, this is your ticket to the lifeboat. This is you standing in line for a lifeboat on the Titanic. You can't get out of line. You got to stay there and wait for it because, you never know when the next realignment move is going to happen, when the Super League break happens, whatever that is. And you've got to be ready, and football is the way that you get ready. So you're just stuck. You really are stuck. And that's going to be a difficult thing for many basketball coaches and basketball programs to deal with. So Dellinger says, here's where we start to set up potential conflict moving forward. To keep up, Power Conference schools may need to circumvent the new revenue sharing pool cap by orchestrating third-party and booster-backed NIL deals, essentially violating what the NCAA's own attorney describes as the central part of the landmark House settlement agreement prohibiting booster pay. Yeah, so the idea here would be, instead of just going to someone with really deep pockets who can throw out a bunch of money and just hand over a bag of cash, these have to be, hey, you got to go sign some autographs. You got to do a commercial. And it's got to be fair market value. It can't be like we're just greasing you up with a bunch of extra money because you did this thing. That's the difference now. Again, all great in theory. We'll see how it works in practice. But one of the things that's very interesting about this, I actually had a chance to talk with K-State Athletics Director Gene Taylor about it. Was that earlier this week or just last week? I guess it was last week by this point. But he thinks that this may bring back something that college athletics is very, 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 very familiar with. And that, of course, is none other than cheating. Our old friend cheating. So I thought this was a really interesting way to view this. Listen to what Gene Taylor had to say. From talking to your coaches, or just your perception that so if everyone could follow me here, like with revenue sharing, maybe this evens the playing field again, turns it back toward more a traditional, recruiting will matter if everybody theoretically has the same ish amount you spending on their sport.
You say that, and I kind of laugh because coaches, yes, they feel that that's a chance, but now I feel everybody's going to go back under the table. Well, those schools that have typically gone back under the table are going to go back under the table. And that might be the case. I would say if they do and they get hammered, it's not going to, again, the plan, everything's great on paper, right? The plan is this enforcement group is going to come after those schools, and they're going to be quick, and they're going to be swift, and they're going to be efficient, and they're going to hammer them. So if they do try to go under the table or around the cap, or not report third-party NIL deals, and they get caught, then it's going to be a costly move for those schools. But that's where our coaches' minds go, is okay, great. We're back all in the same, equal playing field, but those that have cheated in the past are going to continue to cheat. So I guess we'll just deal with that when we, get there.
I mean, how ironic is that? If we were to have done this whole thing, do all of this. Oh, why am I not? There we go. If we're going to do all of this just to come back and be right back into a position of you got to cheat to win. I mean, it's the most college athletics thing ever. But I think that is kind of the idea here. If schools are going to be looking at this man, they're really cracking down on us with this Deloitte thing. This is getting hard. Then we'll just go back to bags of cash. We'll just go back to bags of cash in the locker room. Had not crossed my mind, but obviously coaches are thinking about it. I saw Gene Taylor was quoted in Ross Dellinger's article saying something very similar too. Clearly that's going to be out there. And now that idea is planted, deep into SEC minds who would listen. SEC? I'm not saying, I'm just saying, who would have the most incentive to do this? Probably the league that right now has the number one basketball product out there, the league that is going to have to commit to football more than anybody else, and the league that has the history of handing out a lot of those, $1,000 handshakes in its past. That seems to be the league where this would become the most rampant and something that everybody else would have to worry about and deal with. But on that front, Dellinger says those in the Big East are rooting for the clearinghouse to work. Of course they are, though they aren't necessarily optimistic. Of course they are not. Who would be optimistic, with the history of the NCAA, that college athletics would be able to string together something that actually has legitimate teeth here? Big East folks expect power leagues to test the clearinghouse's fair market value system and the compensation range that Deloitte has created to determine if third-party deals are kosher. Oh, they're going to test that out. They're going to test that out. There is like an appeals process where you can go tweak it and come back. So it's not like you just throw it out there once and it gets totally shot down. You've got a chance to go tweak it and do it again. You can bet your what that there are going to be a lot of schools that try to do that, try and milk as much as they can out of those and call the bluff of Deloitte. How much power do you guys actually have? How much are you going to actually exert? Let's see it. There's a quote from Travis Goff here in this Ross Dellinger article. Quote, at a place where football matters, we can't justify $7 to $9 million to be shared with basketball. I mean, that's a tough reality for Bill Self to deal with, right? Like Bill Self, man, I've made this school the whole brand that is Kansas athletics. Like, that's me. I'm going to have to play that much of a second fiddle to Lance Leipold in football, and nothing against Leipold, who's clearly a phenomenal coach. But man, you can see that causing some friction. You can see how that would cause some friction. Now, Goff makes a point here that I do think is fairly salient. He says, we do think we have some innate advantages at Kansas: coaching, culture, institutional brand, fan base, facilities. They will all move the needle. And that's where it's, basically saying hey, we may not have the most money, but we could probably still recruit pretty well just because people will want to come wear the Jayhawk. They want to come play in Allen Fieldhouse. Now you better get it back on track. Bill Self better figure it out actually on the court if you want to maintain all those advantages. But I do think that is true. You can make up for some of the lack of money just because you're Kansas. That will still go a long way. A Big 12 AD was quoted as saying, our whole governance model is based on one sport. If you want to be a basketball only school, you're going to end up in the West Coast Conference. Sorry, WCC. And unsurprisingly, Jeff Jackson, commissioner of the Missouri Valley, said, it's kind of interesting from my seat. I don't have a whole lot of empathy for the Power Four's financial concerns. Welcome to our world. Facts. I would not have a lot of sympathy either if I were somebody from outside of a Power Four conference. Now, the last question here and kind of the final frontier on this. If this is the way it goes, let's say this all plays out the way that on paper it would right now. Big East schools are going to spend twice as much on their basketball rosters because Power Four schools are trapped with having to rev share more of their money to football, and they start having more success, the Big East does, than Power Four schools. What happens then? What happens then? Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti have so much influence over the entire college athletics landscape right now. How do they tilt the scales back toward them? What rule do they make? What do they do? Quote, what does our future state of being look like that might allow a non-FBS school to outspend in basketball? Asked one D1 conference commissioner. I don't think that future is going to exist. They, meaning the SEC and Big Ten, they have the control and they're going to stop that from happening. How exactly it would go down, I'm not entirely sure, but I very much understand that sentiment. Greg Sankey's not going to let the Big East stand in his way. Sankey seems to be really loving him some SEC basketball lately. He's been using his Twitter fingers about it. Who did he dunk on? Was that Danny Cannell? He dunked on Danny Cannell the other day. He's got the Twitter fingers going. He clearly is all in on SEC basketball right now. He's not going to just stand by and watch it get trampled over by the Big East.